Gospel according to the 15th chapter of Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything he had, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. When he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then the older brother became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Oh, the prodigal son. A story we all know, yes, have heard before. We often have a pretty standard way of interpreting this story, kind of an allegorical understanding that has stood the test of time. And you've probably heard it. You could probably say it with me. Usually it goes that the father is a stand-in for God, right? Who is generous and forgiving and welcoming and accepting. The sons are us humans, either squandering what we have in search of worldly pleasure, or angry and resentful like the older brother, feeling like the world owes us a living. Have you heard this interpretation before? I'm sure. And usually we make it a lesson on how we are to forgive and love each other. We should always welcome and celebrate others, even the screw-ups like this crazy God the Father character does. Be like the father, not like the oldest son, we often hear. And definitely don't be like the younger son. But there are other ways to look at this story. Because it's a parable, there's no one specific way to understand it. Parables are meant to hold a multitude of meanings, and something new might crack open each time we read it at different points in our lives. And if you start to look a little deeper at this one, you can start to poke some pretty big holes in this interpretation. For example, is the father all generous and loving, or is he a parent who can't say no to his kid and plays favorites? Is the older son grumpy and selfish, only thinking about himself? Or is his anger and frustration completely understandable and valid? I'm an oldest child, so I've always naturally affiliated with that guy. And is the younger son a greedy, selfish guy, or, yeah, there's really no other way to interpret that guy, is there? Well, let's look at this story again, and I challenge you to put aside whatever ideas you have about this as we try to see it anew. Okay, back to the beginning of the story. First, the younger son asks for half of his inheritance, and he wants it now. Who does that? Someone super selfish and unreasonable, right? And actually, this would be a major insult to his father in his culture then, but really now it would be as well if someone asked for this. To ask your parent to give you your inheritance before they die so you can leave and do God knows what with it, with no plans to return or pay it back or support the family otherwise? He's basically saying to his father, I wish you were already dead. Yikes. I wonder, why does he do this? What is it that he is seeking in this move? Is he really trying to hurt his father and the rest of his family? Does he truly believe his fortunes lie elsewhere? Or does he really need to get out of there for some other reason? We don't know. It could be any of these things or none of them, or he really could just be a very lazy, selfish brat. And then, after he makes this ridiculous, insulting request, his father says yes. Who does that? Why in the world does he say yes to this? Is he one of those parents who just can't say no to their kids? It can easily happen in well-off families like this one. Parents just don't know where to draw the line. Or does he just like this son better than the other one? Is he terrible at interpersonal boundaries in general? And what did it mean to give his son half his property? He probably had to sell land and livestock to do so. It's not like he had it all sitting in the Bank of Jerusalem. And if that's the case, then this would have been a big deal to go through all that effort to remove that resource from the family holdings, one that's obviously been built up over a long period of time, and to give up part of their land. I mean, they were Jews after all. Land is important. And I wonder, what was the family's wealth like after this? And also, what did his wife think of all this, if he had one? I always can't help but wonder that. So all that happens, and the son leaves, he spends all his money, has to get this humiliating job that's basically a step above begging. And so he decides to come home and beg his father for forgiveness. And when he does, he's done these terrible things, he's lost half the family fortune. What does his dad do? He runs to greet him and falls all over himself with his welcome and rejoicing, like nothing had ever happened. Again, what? Why? Maybe his favorite kid came home and he's very happy? Does he have a selective memory? Maybe he's so darn rich that it didn't make a difference that much to lose half? Of course, maybe he just missed and loved his kid. But given the circumstances, shouldn't it be a little more complicated than that? It's no wonder why the older son feels the way he does. He's resentful and angry, and let's admit, I think most of us would feel similarly in this situation. So I have to wonder, did the father always favor the younger, consciously or subconsciously? And is that why he never celebrated the older son's steadiness and faithfulness? As the oldest, does the oldest son take very seriously his duty to care for his family's legacy? And if so, how would his brother's lack of care make him feel about his brother? Does he have hopes and dreams that lie elsewhere that he could never explore because of his duty and his commitment to his family. So you can see, each of these characters has some flaws. Like us, the people in this story are a little bit messy. They are imperfect. They make mistakes. So why does Jesus tell this story? What's important for us to learn here? Well, the answer lies even further back in chapter 15, where we find this in Luke. Jesus tells this parable and a couple others right before this one, right in a row, as an answer to a critique. The scribes and Pharisees, religious leaders of his community, were, I quote, grumbling and saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." These parables, including the prodigal son, are Jesus' answer to the question that these leaders are asking underneath their grumbling. Why? Why does he do this? Why does Jesus hang out with the bad people, the known sinners? Why, they wonder, when this is outside of all our social norms and our cultural customs and religious practice? And with this question, with this parable, Jesus is sending a question right back at them. He is basically saying, okay then, who is a sinner? Is it the one we normally see as bad? The usual suspects or the culturally determined villains? Or is it a little more complicated than that? All of these characters in this story are messing it up. None of them are quite doing the right thing. They are selfish, greedy, self-serving, manipulative, ungrateful, jealous, resentful, etc., etc. But here's the truth of it. Haven't we all found ourselves guilty of the sin that each displays? Selfishness, greed, lack of boundaries, manipulating others, ignoring others, jealousy and resentment, etc., and so on and so forth. Aren't these guys in the story and all of us sinners in need of welcome at Christ's table? That's what this day, Ash Wednesday, and the whole season of Lent is all about. It's a reminder that we are all equal when it comes to our role in the sin game. When we confess here tonight that we are in bondage to sin and we cannot free ourselves. This story, as all parables do, invites us to find ourselves in it, to look and see our own story reflected back. Where do you find yourself in this story of the prodigal son this year? Maybe with the father, the oldest son, so responsible and always doing the right thing, not super happy about it. The younger son making some questionable choices. Maybe one of the many bystanders who are kind of mentioned but we don't hear from. Maybe Jesus. Maybe the scribes and the Pharisees. The good news is that no matter what you're dealing with or mistakes you have made or failures you have faced, you too are welcomed at the table. No matter how much of a jerk you've been, no matter who you've hurt intentionally or not, when you've been too wrapped up in your own hurt and pain and anger to care about anything else, Jesus sets the table for you too. Just as you are, warts and all. In his extravagant welcome, he is saying, you are worthy. You, messed up human you, are worth all the love and mercy and forgiveness and peace and reconciliation and welcome that God has to give again and again and again. So tonight, as we remember our mortality and hear once again that we are nothing but dust, and to dust we shall return, as we hold together both our worthiness and our unworthiness, our sacredness and our profaneness, our finitude and our infinitude, our deserving and our undeserving, our perfect imperfection, let us remember that God can do incredible things with a little bit of dust and has called you worthy. All of us here and all creation are merely dust and spirit, held together in God's welcoming grace and love, just as we are. Thanks be to God. Amen.